right, gang, and welcome to a Tuesday, new month, new webinar. My name is Jeremy Hazel, and I'll be your guide, let's say, through this 1-hour webinar. And today, you folks are here for 3 ways to align your audit program with the cost of quality. Now, I thought a lot about the title for this webinar, and I said, if I had 1 hour to talk to people, what are the things that I would like to communicate with them around this concept? And really, I use these words very, let's say, deliberately. I want to show you how to gain traction for your internal audit program. Now, when I say internal audit program, I'm talking about the sum of all the audits that you will do for your IATF certificate, like process, system, product. It could even apply down to CQIs and such. And so a lot of times people have problems gaining traction for their programs. Let's say that they're going to do a certain number of audits in a certain way one year, and getting people to participate and really care is a major hurdle for people in the quality space. So I thought about the term traction because once you gain traction, we can begin to move. And with that movement comes attention. Now, what I want to do, I want to increase the visibility of your audit program because the thing may be turning, it may be moving. But what I need you to do is I need you to get attention for it, right? It's going to need funding. It's going to need time. It's going to need some sort of attention from your upper management. And that brings us to the third and final one, funding. In order for the mission to continue, you have to be able to secure funding. And the people who typically fund these internal audit programs are typically not the people that know a lot about the internal audit program as an aggregate. So I thought about it and I said, these are the 3 things that I really want to teach people. And not only do I want to kind of show them how to do this, but I also want to give you 3 actionable techniques that you can walk away from here in order to work your audit program more efficiently, make that connection so that you can get the traction, attention, and funding to be successful. Now, much like any other webinar you may have taken with me, let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda. The first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to take a look at cost of quality and the IATF linkage. Now, the reason why I put this first, a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in this webinar, people who run audit programs typically are more familiar with the IATF shalls than they are with cost of quality. So what I want to show you here is that these 2 things link together. After that, we're going to go into the act of strategically planning the program, in this case, the audit program, for performance, okay? In other webinars that we did last month, let's say, one of the reasons why attraction wasn't being, say, gotten is because we failed to focus on performance. And so what I'd like to be able to do, once you realize that these 2 things are linked and not separate, I want you to think strategically, because the planning of a program is 100% a strategic activity. After that, we're going to take a look at 3 techniques in order to increase your effectiveness for internal audits relating to the program that utilize that cost of quality. And finally, as Chris mentioned, we're going to wrap up with some open Q&A. Now, usually I don't go through much of my background and my pedigree, but on this topic, I do want to cover this for just a moment. A lot of my background, starting in the mid-90s, was in manufacturing and in quality. I had more CQ whatevers after my name than I had room on my business card. And when I went into my college program, the thing that was available to me was an organizational finance degree. So here I was with a background in quality and a degree in finance. And what I did during my master's program is I combined those 2 things in, because what I discovered is that the quality function was not talking to the management function. The people that had the checkbook speak a distinctly different language than the people in the quality realm who typically speak shalls and shoulds. So what I did for the last part of my career here, I focused on helping quality individuals and quality management systems link to financial performance in an attempt to unify all of these different areas, from the QMS to the EMS to the safety management systems. And so you're talking to somebody here that has been on both sides of the world, and I'm going to show you how to speak today a different language. And the reason why I want to start by setting the stage, for many people that speak IATF, now I'm talking IATF, but this could easily be ISO 9000. This could be AS 9100. We speak a different language. We think about shalls and shoulds, but your management speaks a distinctly different language, which is time and money. And so in order to gain the traction that you need for your audit program, you have to be able to translate the activity that you're going to do, in this case, an internal audit program, to the value that it provides. And you have to be able to express this in terms of time and money. So the first thing that I want to do is, for those of you that may be a little more academically inclined, a little more toward the shalls and the shoulds, I want to show you how these two things are not separate, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look here at these first two bullet points. The first two bullet points, the way that I think about it when I go in to consult with organizations, the IATF standard, the AS 9100 standard, pretty much any quality management system standard, I want you to think of it that it describes how to build a system that achieves overall business objectives, which should in turn lead to a higher level of performance. Now, notice this term, for the business. Now, let's think about that statement for just a moment. When you think about the ISO 9000 standard, when you think about the IATF standard, most people think of it as a pure quality management system. But if you step outside of the quality function for a moment, what you're going to see in all of these standards, it is a guide composed of best practices for a business that will help them achieve theoretical customer satisfaction and, as such, profitability year after year. Let me give you an example. In section 4.1 of the ISO standard, which is part of IATF, they talk about internal and external context of a business. Do you think your business made it this far without looking at the changing marketplace and the field and determining what trends are changing, which customers are exiting the business, which competitors are coming in? No, that's called strategic planning. And when you look internally, does your business at a certain point look at the headcount that they have, the types of products coming in, and make adjustments in their budgets? That's usually called your operations planning, right? So if you think about it, not in terms of shalls and shoulds, what those standards are asking you to do is look outward at the changing playing field, which is actually good. And it's forcing you to look inward at the changing issues within your own business. Now, the thing that the IATF doesn't necessarily connect with, and the reason we need CoQ, the IATF does not inherently address the why. So if you looked at this like a playbook and you said, if you follow these best practices, you stand a better than average chance of being in business year on year, because you're achieving some form of customer satisfaction to build a product that people want. The next question from the next higher level, let's say, of thinkers, is why? Why should we engage in this? And so this is the question the cost of quality answers. Cost of quality tries to connect the language of business with the language of quality to answer why we should engage in these behaviors. Now, let me push a little bit. One of the things I hear quality folks say is customer satisfaction, right? When we do internal auditor training and we talk about the whys for these standards, That comes up time and time again. Here's the trick. If you want to test yourself, try explaining why somebody should engage in that particular shall statement, and you are not allowed to use the term customer satisfaction. What it forces you to do is connect with why we engage in these behaviors. As an example, when you think about some of the traceability requirements that are unique to the IATF, the reason you engage in some of those traceability requirements is so that in the event of a recall, you know your exposure. And what will that avoid? Pulling too much in the area of the recall or being too narrow in the scope. So in a way, it allows you to right size the potentiality of the recall. You see how this shifts a little bit? And if we look to cost of quality, the recall cost will be an external cost of quality. More on that coming up later. And then cost of quality also allows us to determine to what level we should engage in the activity. So the way I look at it, if you have a $10,000 problem, are you going to spend $1 million to fix it? Absolutely not. If you have a $5 problem, are you going to spend $50 to fix it? Absolutely not. So what cost of quality tries to do is connect with the why and to limit the level in which we should engage in those to an area which makes us how do I put this? Responsible, right? The idea is to spend responsibly to achieve that level of satisfaction to an acceptable level. And so these things are connected. They're not separate. One dictates the how-to, the tactical playbook. The cost of quality says, this is why, and to this level. And so these two things actually work very harmoniously if we try to stop separating them. Now, just in case, one thing you'll hear me say a lot of times, like me, but don't trust me, right? So in the 2016 version of the IATF, they were so interested in cost of quality that they added a totally separate input for cost of poor quality. Now, we're going to talk a little more about that later, but the reason why I wanted to include this slide, many people may have never heard of cost of quality, and you may have glassed it over in favor of some more traditional, let's say, things that you're familiar with in the IATF standard. For me, this is one of the most important additions into the 2016 version, because finally, as auditors, we have a target. The very existence of cost of poor quality in your management review for audit program managers means you now have a target with measurable performance. That's huge. So without this foundation, we may not be successful in the next step of our journey. Let's take a look now at the traditional 4 categories, okay? Now, before I say traditional 4 categories, traditionally, the academics can largely agree. Now, notice how many wiggle words there were in there. Traditionally, largely, agree. Notice I didn't say perfect agreement. The academics can largely agree that when it comes to cost of quality, there are 4 distinct categories. Now, the first 2 categories, what we will call external failure costs and internal failure costs, are traditionally referred to as cost of poor quality, what we're going to call CoPQ, okay? Now, for those who may just be discovering these words for the first time, the way that I like to describe it, external failure costs are those things that you have because something got outside of your organization. So, warranty cost, customer returns, but they could be sort invoices for those things, right? So if you have to call a sorting company and they hand you a $12,000 sort bill, that's a cost of poor quality from an external issue. And then you've got fines and other charges relating to external issues. The great unifier here is cost of poor quality from an external perspective is anything you incur because something got out. Now, that doesn't just include the cost of the part. If you have to get on a plane and you have to go apologize, the cost of that plane ride, the hotel, all the travel costs wrapped up are still part of the cost of quality. For those that are attending, cost of quality is not the cost of the quality department. And when we talk about internal failure costs, these are costs that exist even if it didn't go right inside the organization. Now, the most prevalent one that we are all familiar with, scrap costs, right? So anything scrap, that's cost of poor quality. Also, if you have temp labor for non-standard sorting operations and rework, that's a cost of internal quality, anything that you're sorting. Plus, let's say that you run, I don't know, you're supposed to run 2% scrap and you run 8% scrap. And in return, you have to work a Saturday. That overtime for the machines is a cost of poor quality. So the thing that I want you to connect with before I turn the page, you have external and internal failures. They're connected into the supplemental for management review published in the IATF. And on the other side of the line, let's take a look at the other two categories. When we do this part, you offset these with appraisal costs and prevention. So appraisal cost, generally speaking, is anything you can put the word test behind. From a design perspective, this is your DV testing. From a process perspective, this is your control plan, right? All of the things in the detection column that then move into the control plan. And along that line, we also have the prevention costs. This could include training, auditing. If I'm teaching this concept for PFMEA, this is anything in the prevention column of the PFMEA. Now, don't get hung up on where these exist so much because we're talking about audit programs. Whether you want to call it appraisal, whether you want to call it prevention, call it anything you want, right? The point is, we have to be able to start talking about it from a perspective of cost. So what I'd like to do now, I'd like to walk you through how this world between quality and cost of quality shift a little bit. And I'd like to give you two different perspectives for your consideration. Okay, so let's do a little bit here. This is going to be a very simple word problem. I promise, no deep intellectual thinking. I have a widget. We make 100,000 units over 200 production days. It means we make 500 a day. We get charged $80 to produce said widget. We sell it when all is said and done for 100. 10 operations. And if we have to call the service center to come pull our unit, they charge us $200 in addition. These are your demographics. So stay with me. My quality engineer comes running down the hall and they tell me, I want to do a diameter check. Now think about it, folks. Diameter check is a quality term. It is not time nor money. You remember when I said management speaks time and money? So when management hears diameter check, they hear, bop, 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 bop. We have to be able to convert it. So let's convert it. If we need 60 minutes a day to do these routine checks, and we pay an average of $15 an hour, here's the question. What is the appraisal cost for implementing this strategy if 1 hour a year, or should say 1 hour a day, is used to check parts on a yearly basis? Well, this is going to be pretty simple. This is 200 man days multiplied by 1 hour a day, multiplied by $15 an hour, equals $3,000. Okay, I'm going to put this down here on the screen here in just a second. That is the cost to check those parts. Now, management should say, what do I get for this $3,000? What's in it for me? As a quality professional, if you cannot draw the line in terms of what you get for the $3,000 you're about to spend, you need to go back to the drawing board. So you go back to the drawing board and you say, you know what? We know that we had diameter issues in a previous job. We know that we got 1% warranty on that job. So if I'm going to run 100,000 units, that means 1,000 units are going to come every year back to me. And we're going to have to remake those units. And the Maytag man is going to have to charge us $200 in addition to the cost. So not only do we get charged the cost of making it, but we get charged for pulling it by the service center. So in reality, every year we stand to lose over $250,000 on this diameter issue. You see how this changes and gives some credence, let's say some sort of a confidence in why we're doing the diameter check. Now, the other way this works, what is the internal scrap cost? The line runs 98% good product. So every year, 2,000 units are going to go to the hospital, and we're going to multiply those two by $20 worth of material and 15 minutes of labor, which is $3.75. This makes the internal cost $47,500 annually. So the conversation my quality group is having, if you allow me to do the diameter check, I stand between you and $47,000 of scrap or $250,000 in warranty. Choice is yours. You see how we now translated quality speak into something from a time and money standpoint, which then allows our management to take decision. This is a skill that most quality professionals do not inherently possess, and one of the most important skills that we can train and coach people on, because this isn't covered anywhere in college programs, professional programs. This is how to lead. Now, with that being said, before I get into the strategizing, now that we know what cost of quality is, we know that it's linked to the IATF standard, we're going to talk a little bit about strategizing. But in order to do this, I have to know who is in the room with me. So for those of you that have taken a seminar with me before, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll. So this helps me figure out who is in the room so that I can tailor the next part of my presentation to whatever it is you guys want. So first question, I identify my scope of influence around this topic. This is one of those multiple choice. The second one, I feel my audit program. And the third one, now this is interesting. How qualified do I consider my auditors, including myself, to enact real change? And I'm talking real change. I'm talking about being able to move that needle. All right. I have a rule. We stop when we get above 70% participation. So if you want the fun to stop, participate. Makes life easy. We've got a lot of executors for the audit schedule. All right. All right, we got some people who monitor the performance. Fair enough. All right, 62% and climbing. Got an overwhelming bunch that thinks the audit program could benefit from linkage. All right. And the reason why I stop after we hit 70%, typically not a lot changes after that. The averages are set. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share out these results with you. And I do this so that you know who's in the room with you, to make sure that you're not alone. The first one, I got a lot of people here who execute the schedule, monitor the schedule, responsible to perform. Notice how a fair majority feel the program could benefit from better linkage. And we've got a lot of people that think that their auditors are moderately qualified. All right, now that's a good one. And one, I'm glad to see that, because what I'm going to show you after this You might rethink that one. I hope you don't. But I think that maybe when you see kind of what the plan is to link it, maybe you'll think through it a little bit differently. And if you feel like you're the only one going through some of these challenges as the audit program manager, at least you know now you're in good company. All right, let's go ahead and stop sharing. Let's go ahead and get back after it. So now that we know that cost quality is a thing, right? We're going to use it to fine tune our response to the audit program. Now, in order to do this, I want you to think of what you consider the audit program, and I want you to think more holistically. Now, one of the first things that I teach people in any strategic planning, whether it's audit program planning, whether it's organizational programming, anything, objective is everything. Coming back to FMEA for the 5 T's, the first one is intent. Intent is objective, and objective is measurable. So when you think about your audit program, the first thing you want to do, you want to strategize your objective. And to do that, typically, we will write an objective statement. Now, this is a typical objective statement. And I say that I've been in a ton of organizations. I'm going to say well over 100 plus. And that was probably just in the last 4 or 5 years. And this is as exciting as it gets. Most people think of their audit program. It's designed to assess the conformance of a facility, in this case to the IATF ISO standard, and the organization's own documentation. This is about exciting as your car's owner manual is to read, all right? This is a boring snooze fest. So what I'm going to show you here is how to change your perspective on it. And I'm going to give you a very simple 3-step process, okay? So I'm going to clear out my drawing. Let's go ahead and take a look at step 1. The first thing you want to do, figure out the context of the organization. All audit planning at a macro level should begin with the organization's performance metrics. You need to understand the customer-specific requirements that your organization subscribes to. You also need to understand jobs that may be coming up, jobs that are ramping down. And you want to make sure you get those management review metrics to get a sense of the company. Remember, for the IATF, they require you to adjust the audit schedule based on things like risk and performance. So if you are over the audit program, your program needs to beat in lockstep with the pulse of your organization. I always say, if your audit program schedule is the same January 1st as it is on April 1st, you have failed. Because what you're saying in that is nothing changed then between January and April. No new customer complaints, no new jobs, no new changes. You are a complete stagnant mushroom. Nobody can say that even 15 minutes after the schedule was published. The second thing you should be doing as the audit program leader, architect, whatever you want to call it, do some investigation, review the corrective action reports, look at the root causes, look at those things that are still occurring. What is the roll throughput yield that's causing the scrap? And what are the system-based processes that are contributing to the process issues? As an example, if you see that you have 5 processes in an injection molding operation that are all struggling with tooling issues, tooling design, and the maintenance of that tool had better be your system processes that you're looking at, right? Because that one process is jacking up all your processes. So the first one, get to know your organization, know how it performs, check its pulse. Second one, understand what's ailing it. The third one, and this is where people don't do their homework. I want you to think about this from a perspective of auditing. Estimate the amount of improvement that you would feel comfortable with your internal audit program making on those issues. Now, there's a couple factors you need to think about. How much pull do you really have to make the changes that are necessary? How many resources do you have? And what is the real state of the company? What do they want to improve? Folks, don't delude yourself. Don't lie to yourself at this point. And this is huge. Now, I want you to think differently. An example, and a very quick one. If I did these three things, I go out and I look at the state of my company. Line A is an overmolding for a safety critical underhood part. We're seeing $15,000 a month in surcharges from the customer, and it's been going on 12 months because they're afraid to pull it. This is equated to $180,000 in hard dollar sorts. We take a look at some of the issues surrounding it, and we see tooling issues. We think that our audits may be able to fix the tooling issues. Line B, we quoted line B at 3% scrap. That makes our profitability, and it's currently 6. The delta in scrap is $75K annually, and we're seeing a majority of the scrap from the Pareto diagrams at the floor due to flash issues coming off the same gate. I think I can eliminate that. See the green number? Line C, premium freight. This has caused $36K in premium freight, and this is due to excessive downtime caused by tray and robots failing to pick. You know what? I think we can get rid of that. And with line D, if I go out there and I walk the line, I got a temp sorter. Been there 6 months. We paid him $48,000 so far. That's a call it and a chuck issue because of poor capability that's causing the sort. I can eliminate that. That all goes away. And the reason why I want you to do this, now this is where I need you to think about the academic versus the leader, right? Versus the financial. While you might be saying, you know what, I'm uncomfortable with the financial aspect. Do you think if this is a safety critical under the hood part that your customer is interested in this issue disappearing? Yeah. You think you got PPM for this issue? Absolutely. You think that the customer is getting a lot of heat because it's a safety regulatory thing? Oh yeah. Does the IATF standard want you to be effective and efficient? Yep. So if you're at 3% scrap and you drop to 6% scrap, does that make you more effective? Absolutely. And here's the thing, folks. The only thing that separates a scrap from an escape is your detection. So if you reduce scrap, you get fewer escapes. Rocket science. Over here, premium freight, that's a no-brainer. And over here, are we really interested in capability? Absolutely. So if you have an internal audit program and you reduce PPM, scrap rate, improve on-time performance, and increase capability, that is exactly what you are supposed to be doing for your organization. And so if you do a little bit of work, here is how you shift the objective statement. We're going to assess the conformance of facility ABC to the IATF standard with the intent of reducing CoQ by 300,000 over the previous year's amount. Think about it that way. We can even go COPQ, right? Because you're going to spend on audits to reduce cost of poor quality. So your cost of poor quality, let's even do COPQ if you want to get technical. Your COPQ should drop year on year if your internal audits are performing. This is how you put your neck out there. And if you're not comfortable with the fact that you're going to put your neck out there, I have to ask is whether or not you're the right person for the job. Because as an internal audit program manager, you're asking for resource. Audits are not free. And so if you say I'm going to take up $20,000 of resource, management should be asking, what do I get for $20,000? Cost of quality allows you to get funding, get traction, and get attention. And this is important because it's from this top level statement, folks. And this is an important thing. The scheduling of your individual audits will be impacted by this larger thinking. The resources will be influenced by this larger thinking and how you define the timing of those audits. So if you scheduled it for February, Maybe it's February 14th because you're going to launch a new program, right? It defines your timing on when you do it. And it's from here, we're going to talk about the 3 techniques now that we have the strategic vision. Now, in order to do this, this is where I really mention if you're really capable of making change. I want one more poll. We're going to do a second one because some of these questions that are going to come out are going to come back. All right, let's launch poll with questions 4 through 6. What do you think could improve your audit program? Before I give you the answer, I'm going to ask your opinion. How close does your product data impact the planning of your system? And the last one, of course, would be interested in more training. That's the gimme on this one. The other 2, spoiler alert, they're going to tie back directly to the techniques. All right. Good deal. Again, 70%, we stopped the fun. All right. Good deal. Almost there. There's some very surprising numbers here. This is good. Very excited. All right. 70%. Let's go and end the poll here. Share them out. Again, better cost quality linkage. That is single-handedly the most important linkage when it comes to audit programs. And most of you say your product audit data impacts the system. If that is true, that is awesome. I'm going to show you a technique here. All right. So we're going to go ahead and stop sharing. And let's get into the 3 techniques. All right. First technique, put the right people on the right job. The technique that I always use. The responsibility must be measured and balanced with the authority to carry out the task based on the role you give them. So this is why I always say choose people with a proven track record of performance. If you choose somebody that does not have a proven track record of being able to build bridges, you will never have an effective audit program. Or if you task somebody with the responsibility for something and they do not have the corresponding authority, you will never get the right level. That will lead to a culture of blame. Now, let me help you with this. If I come back to this being the objective, this, my friends, right here, I'm going to run this out, is a tooling issue. This is a tooling issue. This is a robotics issue. This is a machining issue. If I do not have auditors that have that experience, I will never be successful at solving this. So when we think about auditor competency, and I will tell you straight up, I am not an engineer. I'm a finance guy with a quality background. If you send me out to fix a tooling issue in a molding tool, it does you no good to send me, because what am I going to do? Stare at it and look at it like, yep, that's broken, all right. You must look at the people that have a track record for performing. You then give them the audits training in order to float through the systems, and you find the individuals that are already natively qualified. Okay. A lot of folks out there, and I'll say a lot of companies, choose auditors because every year they ask who wants to do auditing, and whoever was the slowest one in the hallway gets added. So the first technique, balance the responsibility and authority, choose the people that already have a proven track record of performing. And the reason why I want the bridge builders, your audit will be directly determined by getting your auditee to do what you need them to do, even though you don't have direct authority to get them to do it. So if you're not speaking to them in the way that they receive it, you'll never have the right level. Now, the second thing, practice selective focus, okay? One of the things I always say here, so many people try to boil the ocean. Now, Notice that in the IATF standard, remember the 3-year cycle for both process and system. There we go. Product says at appropriate intervals. For the system and the process audits, remember you have a 3-year cycle. If I know these are my high running lines, which are eating my lunch, which lines should be in my schedule this year? Those. Which lines should get very, very little focus unless there is a reason that you should increase it? Any line that is not those. Okay? So many times we think about auditing every line on every shift within every, what is eating your lunch? The way I look at it, it's like triage. If you can't stop the bleeding, you'll never make it back to solve the infection. So the way that it should work, stop trying to boil the ocean, practice selective focus, and mercilessly go after the lines that are eating your lunch, and then worry about the other stuff once you've triaged those. I see a lot of people picking up rocks. And what happens when you have no more room to pick up rocks? Stop turning them over. Okay. Now, the other thing, if I know the issues are due to processes, like in my example, clearly maintenance, I might have some questions around NPI, and I might have some tooling design. These are the systems that I audit. Notice these are my system processes. And how many times should I audit them? Until we get it right. Okay. And the other thing is, a lot of times, can you audit during the day when that is going on? Absolutely. So if you have a tooling design meeting, do your audit inside the tooling design meeting. Sit in on it. Nothing wrong with that. So practice selective focus. And the selective focus only works if the people are the right people. If you have the wrong people, nothing else is going to work. And the last one, we shifted a little bit. Now, this is just my experience. Typically, when we think about the 3 types of audits, system audits get a majority of the accolades and the focus. Process audits are found as, the tech audits, right? Those are the FMEA audits. Those are the CQI audits. But right here, product audits typically get the least amount of attention. But here's the difference. Your customer most directly experiences your process and your system through your product. Okay, now notice this is typically how it works. You have to be able to flip your focus. And when I say flip your focus, your product audits will tell you where your bodies are buried. Your product audits are the early warning sign for your processes, and your processes are all impacted by your systems. So the way that I want you to think about it, you actually want to work backwards from your product to your processes and then strategize your system last. Because what happens if you, like in my example, we have 4 lines that are all experiencing tooling issues. This will allow me to figure out which systemic processes are more aggressively targeting my processes. And my product is going to tell me which lines are eating their lunch for which characteristics. This is completely different. Most of us give very little attention to the product. Instead, we start myopically planning in system without regard to anything in between, and it rolls downhill the other way. So hopefully here you got 3 different techniques. I appreciate the time here. Remember, with the right people in the area. The second technique is going to be making sure that you have your selective focus. You're only focusing on the things that you need to triage. And the third thing is put your product first and shift it from your system. All right, Chris, you want to go ahead and let's go for the Q&A here, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks everyone for sticking with us today. Before we do jump over to Q&A, I want to give people another chance to submit any questions you have to the Q&A portion of your screen. We'll roll through those there. I think starting off, Jeremy, one of the questions we got is, okay, this is great information, but where can I go to learn more, especially surrounding cost to quality? What would you recommend for folks?
All right. Honestly, folks, this is an emerging, how do I put this? This is an emerging science. And when I say emerging science, when you go back, cost to quality is not new. In the academic community, we've been trying to get traction on this now for the better part of 40 plus years. So I'm not sharing anything that is necessarily new. What I am sharing is a new application of it in relationship to the internal audit function. So finding information, as you mentioned, Chris, is extremely hard. Right now, I would tell you that we are planning here at Plexus a couple of the tools. Chris, we're going to be launching a cost to quality planner coming up in the next month or so. And also in our external, or I should say our lead auditor class for 5-day, we do cover cost to quality in the audit planning portion. Now that's different. We do not do it in the internal auditor because the internal auditor is so jam-packed. And it's typically your lead auditors, which is, say, attended by program managers, that we do this part. Because when the auditors go out to execute your vision, you've already done this strategizing so that when they go out and they finish the audit, it supports the cause. So it's in the lead auditor class. Folks, it is woefully, let's say, underrepresented in industry. And Plexus, we're trying to change that. That's been a majority of my focus over the last decade.
Nice. Thanks, Jeremy. And folks, if you do want to learn more about that, please do visit plexusintl.com. I'll drop a link in the chat right now. So in addition, Jeremy, here's a good question. How can we measure the effectiveness of corrective actions from audits?
That's an easy one, right? If you now, this is, I'm going to push a little bit. It's an easy one, but it's a painful one. So I'm going to go into both areas. Here's what I work with auditors on. Now, some of you out there will disagree with me. Turns out it's like everything else. Everybody has their own spin on it. When you go out as an auditor, there's a variety of audit trails that you can find. If the auditor has written up the right corrective action, and when I say the right corrective action, they found the area in the standard in which it's lacking, which caused the non-conforming part, then you should be able to measure the effectiveness, because the pain coming back to the performance, it's like a light switch. And I bring that up because let me kind of work you into the theoretical for 2 seconds. If you look at the standard as a theoretical document where 100% conformance equals a perfect part every time, it's a true north, right? It's a golden standard. Then every non-conforming part must be caused by non-conformance in the standard somewhere. So if your auditor has written up the right corrective action, the effectiveness is generated by the performance improving as a result of that corrective action. And I bring it up because if your auditor did not write the right finding in the right area, then they do the work and their performance still struggles. That means your auditor got it wrong. Good question.
Here's a good one from Ken. Shouldn't manufacturing engineers be looking at cost to quality data and allocating resource to quality issues, perhaps before QA gets there?
100%. But now here's the trick. When we do this, and it's interesting, manufacturing engineering is a department. I would challenge you, as we are in the standards world, a system of processes. Which process is that department working within? So Ken, if you're talking about, should manufacturing engineering be working through the continual improvement process? Sure. Should they be looking at through the preventative action process? Sure. Should they have looked at it at least through the corrective action process? Sure. So the short answer is they should, but it's not the manufacturing engineering group's fault. It's the processes are not, let's go down this route, guiding them in that direction. Yep. Good question.
Okay. When you mention the product audit, do you refer to the final product? And what does the product audit not reveal any issues with the final product, yet there may be a few gaps identified during the process or system audits?
Okay. So let's start with the first part of that. Now, It's an interesting thing. In product audits, there was an FAQ that was generated around product audits for the standard, just about citing this exact thing. Realize that in the product audit, it says at appropriate stages or intervals, right? I'm not sure about the actual text. It's not in front of me. But what that means is, and this comes back to strategization that we do in that lead auditor class, Chris. When you think about your product audits, it means at appropriate intervals. So some of the products, as you mentioned, are viewable in the final good. But what if it's a weld? A weld quality is not necessarily identifiable on the finished good. You have to look at the intermediate stage of that weld and from that data. So when I say product audits, it's up to how you've defined a product audit. And some of your product audits should be on final goods. They're all packed out, ready to rock, right? But there should also be some of your product audit that captures things that are not inherently noticeable, like heat treat data, weld data that are taken at the right intervals to make sure that the hidden is made present. And if your process or system has holes that it's not evident in your product, then two things are happening. One, the percent conforming out of that process or that system is so high that you just didn't catch through your sampling. Or somebody, because they know the right thing to do, is put a Band-Aid on that process and is moving through. So the product is coming out good, despite there may be a hole in your system. So, yep, this is good stuff. And I hate to say it, but you got to strategize your product audits too. Most of your reason your product audits miss the system and the process is because the sampling method is a bit of a hot dumpster fire. Yep.
Understood. Yeah, I see some more questions coming in here. If we don't get to any, we will provide a typed response back to you via email following our live event. And just another reminder, for more information on that course, specifically to John, go to plexusintl.com. You can also visit our YouTube page for some more information and some related videos around these topics. Here's one from Maria. I use the number of nonconformities of the areas to decide which area will be the focus. The less nonconformities, the less audits. Is that okay? And here's a big asterisk. I don't review the product audit results. This is new. So you're opening minds here.
Okay. No, here's the thing. And I'm gonna open some minds and I'm gonna take away some will to live here, all at the same time. Here's the way it works. There is zero correlation between the number of nonconformities, let's say, from an audit and how aggressively you should plan the number of audits or strategized. Anybody that is gauging their planning on the number of nonconformities is dealing with what we'll call a spurious correlation. It's not based on anything. The R-squared value for all of those types of things has been shown to be lacking. And so, Maria, I would not look at the number of nonconformities, let's say, in order to plan my audits, unless you are looking at nonconformities relating to the scrap rates, the PPM. Then you have some problems. But when you say nonconformities, I want to make sure we're not talking about not audit nonconformities, because that's a perverse system. Yep. You should be looking at performance. That is true. So let's do that route. You should be looking at performance.
Sure. How can LPAs fit in, as most places have them, or recommend using this with the cost of quality program?
Okay, no problem. That's a good one. Layered process audit folks are typically down at that floor level. Let's say at a certain interval, you do a layered process audit. What I would do, I calculate the cost of that LPA program, because you know who's doing them, you know how often you're doing them, you know what happens, right? In terms of how often you do them and where you do them. I would take that and then I would look at the performance of the line. And if your LPAs have not positively impacted the line, then I would either modify my LPA or I would accept the fact that the cost of those LPAs is simply the cost of signing up for the customer. Here's my thing. If my LPAs are not helping and not moving the needle, why are you doing them? That's the thing, right? And I do smart stuff.
I'm going to combine two questions here because we're getting after the same thing. In most cases, purchasing area makes decisions choosing the cheapest option. What recommendations can you give to reconcile the interests of the purchasing department and the real expectations of the shop floor? And how does an auditor hold management accountable to complete corrective actions in a timely manner? Budget
All
and
right.
time. Yeah.
Good stuff here. First, purchasing. You have to understand what purchasing gets paid for, right? They have a need to get a cost competitive price, right? So the way that I always reconcile it is I was taught early in my career by somebody much smarter than me, who will actually be part of our February or webinar program. The answer is always yes, time and money. So when purchasing says, I'm going to bring on this vendor, and you know it may be the lower priced vendor, then the additional cost will be the cost of auditing that vendor, along with the cost of poor quality caused by that vendor. And this is why having somebody at the helm that has that authority to make change is so important. Let's say that they are cost competitive. Purchasing has met their cost target, but yet on the back end for the last 6 months, we've seen $80,000 of sort and PPM. And this leads me to the next area. When we talk about holding management accountable, and this is something that I just want to be very clear with, you're not their mother, we're not their parent. So it's one of those things where you give them the information, and management always has the right to retain risk by informed decision and take the decision that works for them. We may not like it, but yet at the same time, this is a big thing. They say in sales, you can never market to somebody that does not see a value for the product. You can never convince management that does not see the value if they're not already looking for it. So you can't hold them accountable. Why? Because they are the leaders. They're steering the ship. You present the information, time and money, and then if they decide to do something different, even in section 6 of the ISO standard, this says one of the ways to retain risk is through informed decision. Let them answer for it. Yep.
I think we'll take one or two more. If your responsibility deals with just the internal quality system audits and not product or process directly, how do you plan the audit focus, since you're responsible for covering the standards and CSRs, customer specific requirements, during the specified amount of time for this audit?
Correct. Now, that comes down to planning, first of all, and now this is just my number. This is in no book. This is in no way, shape, or form designed to be a how-to. When I do an internal audit, the time spent planning my audit is 80% of the time spent auditing. So it's an 80-20 split, because internally, you know where those bodies are buried. You know which systems are struggling with. And so you need to go out and sample. You need to allow yourself to experience something new. Leave yourself room to be surprised. But when I'm looking at system only, I will look at the processes where they're struggling. And then I will go again, focus on the processes, being my customer. And what I'll look for in those processes, what are the systems that I need to fix? And so then those systems should have deviation in their effectiveness measures. Remember that a process has effectiveness and efficiency. So in my example for tooling, if I have 5 lines on tooling, let's say, that are struggling, and I go to the tooling design process and everything is coming up roses, that's a lie, right? Because your customer, their scorecard is saying, I'm hemorrhaging on my tools. So that's how I really strategize. And so those systems, it's true over the 3-year cycle and certain CSRs, but here's the thing, when it comes to those cycles, there is a strategic thing, Chris, and maybe what we'll do, there is a seminar on strategically handling an individual audit that we can do. But I would also say at that point, if you go out and you have a process, let's say it's non-conforming product, that's a system level process. And right now it's showing no escapes and no reason to worry. Can you just do a how you do and walk right by it, do a little audit for 15 minutes and call it a day? If that meets the intent and it's effective. So strategizing, you do have to comply with CSRs. You do have to do your system audits in a 3-year cycle, but I still focus on process. And because process is the customer of system. Systems are building the processes. That's how it works. Good question.
I just want to do one last one, 30
Yeah.
seconds. How could you orient this to a technical center, maybe by APQP projects with major delays or issues instead of lines?
Absolutely. So think about a technical center, right? They're doing an APQP, new program introduction, whatever. I go to the metric, right? And the metric says on time launch in the tank. That gives me my objective, right? So in that on time launch, I need to know what it's cost in terms of tooling delays, expediting, and that may require you to think about the impact. From there, we look at things like, was it because you didn't purchase the tooling in time? So now I'm linking to the purchasing process. Is it because your customer continually put in 4 new revisions of a design? So now you're into the design and control of changes, right? So now I start hunting those systems that are impacting my APQP process. And what I would do, I'd look at the customer of the APQP process, which is the plant at that point, because you have a long time launch. And then I'd say, what areas of my APQP are lacking? And that becomes my sampling to start hunting. Yep. It's all strategy, folks. You are hunting.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. And thanks everyone for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you. If you're looking for those slides for a copy of this webinar, check out our website or YouTube page, plexusintl.com. Folks, we'll see you at the next one. And thanks again.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye-bye.